sei sempre abituato al vocabolario inglese, non mi sorprenderà se cambio in inglese all'inizio. Allora, come diceva Anna, io in passato ero molto coinvolto nel gestione del progetto a livello europeo, ma per fortuna e per mio piacere mi sono anche qualche anno fa ritirato perché, ricordando il motivo perché ho cominciato con questa bellissima missione, la motivazione personale era di fare scienze per queste cose. Adesso che sta dando i numeri, mi fa molto piacere di cominciare a lavorare con i dati che Gaia ci sta fornendo. Oggi voglio parlare appunto su che cosa, alcuni risultati grazie al Gaia, e stiamo parlando dei dati rilasciati scorso anno, che era il secondo rilascio di dati, aprile di scorso anno. E questa è una immagine del cielo fatto con il catalogo di Gaia. Non è un'immagine fotografica. Ogni pixel sulla luminosità e sul colore è basato su tutte le stelle che erano in quella pixel, cioè il flusso proveniente delle stelle in quel pixel. Praticamente questa è una grandissima riduzione di dati, no? Si vede tutto il catalogo in un'immagine, che è bello, ma abbiamo ridotto più di miliardi di stelle in qualcosa come 150.000 pixel. Allora è in un certo senso riduttivo, ma ti dà già un'idea di quanta informazione veramente c'è su tutto il cielo e particolarmente sul nostro galassia. Come dicevo prima, questi numeri da Gaia non viene direttamente dal satellite. La telemetria del satellite ha bisogno di tantissima lavorazione per arrivare alla fine per l'asse molti propri. E qui stiamo parlando di quasi più o meno 500 scienziati e ingegneri, 6 centri di calcoli, includendo una in Torino, che sono dedicati alla riduzione dei dati. Voglio fare un piccolo perdone, mi fa piacere questo grande salto, anche come ho detto prima, per parlare sul secondo data release. C'era un primo data release che era molto meno contenuto, nel senso che c'erano tante stelle, ma soltanto una piccola frazione delle stelle nella prima data release avevano i parallaxes, e infatti la completezza sul cielo della prima data release era piuttosto limitato. Invece con il secondo data release, questo è tra 9 e 12 magnitudi, allora relativamente brillante, ma potevo anche infatti vedere mappe di completezza a magnitudi più deboli e dà lo stesso aspetto. Già con il secondo rilascio di dati è molto più omogeneo la copertura del cielo per i dati astrometrici. Qui sto parlando soltanto delle stelle in Gaia che hanno parallasssi molto propri. Allora, i risultati su cui io parlo oggi sarà anche grazie a altri collaboratori, particolarmente voglio sottolineare il primo nome è Luisa Poggio, che tanti dei risultati che presento oggi è il risultato di sua ricerca di dottorato quando ha fatto PhD, e adesso abbiamo il grande piacere di averlo ancora a Torino come un postdottorato. In un certo senso sto facendo il seminario anche per lei, perché lei potrebbe dare questo seminario facilmente. Una overview di Gaia. La prima parte io parlerò praticamente su 3 o 4 diversi pubblicazioni che sono stati pubblicati sta per essere sottomesso, e la prima parte voglio parlare soltanto sulle piccole frazioni delle galaxie, i 7 milioni di stelle che avevano anche, oltre l'astrometria, anche i velocities, allora le velocità lungo le linee di vista. Per quelle piccole frazioni dei dati possiamo direttamente calcolare loro moto in 3 dimensioni, okay? Perché abbiamo anche sia del moto tangenziale grazie al moto proprio e alla linea di vista. Allora, anche se guardi quella piccola frazione, comunque ti dà un campione di stelle vicini che copre una gran parte delle chart diagram. Questa immagine è basata sulle chart diagram di quelle 7 milioni di stelle e io concentro adesso selezionando i giganti che sono la parte più brillante di questo campione. Allora ci permette di anche guardare, campionare se vuoi le velocità nel disco galattico abbastanza lontano. E qui perché abbiamo un bel campionamento del volume del disco non soltanto vicino al Sole ma anche qualche kiloparsec del Sole, possiamo praticamente come si dice, sezionare, slice and dice, come si dice in inglese, il volume e vedere come cambia la velocità quando stai muovendo in diverse parti delle galassie. Allora, adesso voglio concentrare su quel stratto che è proprio nel disco galattico. E qui sulla sinistra è una mappa della velocità radiale, in questo caso non è vista radiale nel senso che rispetto al centro galattico, e la velocità nella direzione della rotazione. E questo è dopo, tra l'altro, no, questa sì, è la velocità. Qui per calcolare questa velocità devi assumere qualcosa sul moto del Sole, perché ovviamente tutte le misure di velocità che abbiamo, sia il moto proprio sia in linea di vista, sono rispetto al Sole, sono molti relativi. Ma comunque si vede subito che il disco rispetto alla velocità del campo delle velocità, se vuoi dirla, non è una galassia asimmetrica. E questa non è una grande sorpresa, ma la cosa che era un po' di sorpresa è il fatto che è così evidente, è così ovvio quando guardi la velocità delle stelle. Okay? Credo che voi siete già orientati dal centro galattico verso sinistra e il punto nero al centro è il Sole. Guardando poi, questo è su una mappa, infatti se vedi di velocità c'è una buona corrispondenza con dove noi crediamo ci sono i bracci spirali. E questo dice che la velocity field sta dicendo qualcosa anche sulla struttura della galassia. Infatti proprio perché Gaia lavora nella banda ottica, ironicamente forse vedremo la struttura delle galassie con Gaia più facilmente usando la velocità che la densità di stelle, perché ovviamente abbiamo limitazioni in diverse direzioni, perché ci sono tante distinzioni e altre diverse no. Invece basta un campione di stelle per darti un'idea della velocità e si vede molto più facilmente la struttura. Infatti questa è una artist conception of popular artist rendition of our galaxy, and il Sole sarebbe lì, e se io posso sottoporre quella mappa che ti ho fatto vedere prima, sopra questa immagine della nostra galassia si vede che perché questa immagine tra l'altro è una riedizione artistica, ma è in formato di un astronomo, dell'artista che ha fatto questa cosa, non è dipinta per piacere dove sono i braccia spirali, ma era proprio in consultazione con gli astronomi e ha messo affidare più possibile dove c'è il VAR rispetto a dove il Sole, la grandezza del VAR, le posizioni delle braccia spirali, basate su tanti diversi studi. E comunque i risultati di Gaia sono in omogeneità di consistenza con qualcosa che sappiamo già del nostro galassia. Infatti anche usando modelli della velocità che aspetti da modelli dinamici, di nuovo si vede che la velocità anche lì ha qualche corrispondenza con quelle che aspetta. Adesso questa è una mappa ancora nel piano galattico, adesso è la velocità nella direzione perpendicolare con il disco. E di nuovo qui si vede qualcosa interessante, nel senso che verso direzione anticentrico, anti-center direction, abbiamo velocità che positivi. E infatti anche quella non era una grandissima scoperta, era un segnale che è stato cercato per tanto tempo, cioè il segnale che ti aspetta dal work della galassia, il fatto che il disco non è fuori dal solar circle, il disco della galassia non è piatto, ma c'è una distorsione rispetto al disco interno. E questo speriamo di vedere anche il segnale di questa nella velocità delle stelle. Allora, per cercare più chiaramente questo segnale avremo bisogno di più stelle. Allora, prima ricordi che fino adesso ho guardato sulle stelle, che 7 milioni di stelle che avevano anche la velocità di vista. Adesso voglio allargare il mio campione e qui abbiamo usato un metodo, come Luisa Gaia ha trovato questo modo di individuare le stelle giganti rispetto alle stelle giovani e caldi, anche in caso in cui le stelle dell'upper main sequence sono fortemente subite dall'estinzione. Questa linea freccia rossa indica la direzione Random vector, okay, in questa color diagram. So, senza estinzione tutti questi stelle sarebbero qui, e l'estinzione ti smears out the stars, makes them red and red. Ma grazie a questo che stiamo usando, non so se riesci a vedere, stiamo usando il filottermia G, magnitude di Gaia, ma anche i magnitudini della 2mass. Allora, usando quegli stelle in 2mass che sono anche in Gaia, possiamo usare questa tecnica per ricavare un campione di stelle giovane e un campione di stelle più vecchi che sono giganti. Ma tutti e due i campioni sono intrinsecamente luminosi, allora molto utile per mappare la galassia più lontana. Infatti questi sono gli upper main sequence sample that we had. We were able to cross-match it with another catalog, which I think was called the Tycho 2 Spectral something or other catalog. Tycho 2, which was a product of Hipparchus, after that came out, there was a lot of work on the spectroscopic side to characterize the stars that Tycho observed. So from un piccolo frazione di nostri campioni di stelle della upper main sequence sono anche in questo catalogo, ma quelli stelle possiamo verificare che sono infatti upper main sequence stars. E la gran maggioranza infatti del nostro campione, abbiamo alcuni stelle F, ma questa è proprio una piccola frazione rispetto agli altri stelle. La maggioranza sono OV e anche K-stars. E questi sono i giganti, se mettiamo, e qui questo diagramma, questa è quella che ti ho fatto vedere prima, possiamo fare grazie alle parallasse del Gaia, che ci permette di costruire questi diagrammi. Allora, ci sono ancora redning qui, si vede che l'effetto dei redning, infatti questa blob qui più bassa, appena sopra le tracce, the dashed line there, that's the red clump stars. Okay, so we're looking at the red clump stars in giant spider. E questo è un sul cielo del Remain Sequence, il suo campione Remain Sequence è molto come si aspetti, dove essere nel cielo, proprio nel campo galattico. Manca in alcuni zone grazie all'estinzione, ma anche in alcune direzioni non si vede tanto lontano. Allora, se puoi calcolare usando dei parallaxi, fare una stima, infer the distances del parallaxi, possiamo anche mappare dove sono le stelle nei due campioni. Come ci aspetta, i campioni dei giganti sono much more smoother, and you see, of course, more stars toward the center of the galaxy. But then, after a certain distance, because of the limit in magnitude limit of the sample, which is like magnitude limit 15, the density starts to drop off again. Interestingly, the upper main sequence is quite different with respect to the smooth distribution of the giants, and in fact, these concentrations here correspond again to the spiral line. So this is exactly what we expect. The young stars are forming primarily in spiral lines. So this is the local or Orion spur local arm, and this is the inner Sagittarius crane arm and Perseus. And just to convince you a little bit more of that, this is the positions of those three arms. And I should mention that the difference here is because when we inferred these distances, we did not take into account the 0-point error in the parallaxes, which is small in Gaia, but when you start going beyond a couple of kiloparsecs, it becomes a significant, that small 0-point becomes significant. So if we had accounted for the 0-point error, this blob here would be actually a bit closer to the fiducial position of the Persean star. Okay, what we would like to do now, we're going to use a trick. Usually it's, remember I have stars here that don't have greater velocities, right? But I want to calculate, what I want to know is their velocity perpendicular to the disk. And now for the first time, I'm using a typical disadvantage to my advantage. My disadvantage is that the sun is located inside the disk, which makes it really hard to infer galactic structure, right? Because we're right inside of it. You know, imagine trying to map the body or take an X-ray when you're inside the body. It would be really quite hard. But the advantage here of being inside the disk is that almost all of the vertical motion, vertical with respect to the disk of the galaxy, is projected on the proper motions of the stars. Right? So the line of sight component is much less important. I don't really, if I'm close to the galactic plane, I don't need so much the line of sight velocity to calculate what the vertical velocity is. And this is essentially what we do is we take into account differential galactic rotation, because this is the biggest component of the difference in the relative velocity between the sun and the star that's distant, is the differential galactic rotation between the sun and the star. So I can take that into account, assuming a galactic rotation curve. And the only thing I'm missing here is the peculiar motion of the star with respect to its local rotation. But if I do this over with many stars, in a small volume, then I can, averaging over those stars, I can be pretty sure that that small component that's essentially the differential galactic rotation, the component of the component of the star's peculiar motion parallel to the galactic plane, which is projected onto proper motion in the direction of galactic north. Okay, so the proper motion in galactic latitude. That small component is neglected, but it can be averaged out, yeah, because it's peculiar motion, right? So they should average out to 0. So doing this trick, I can then calculate for both of my samples, even if I don't have the line of sight velocity, what the vertical velocity is. And so I do this for cells that have at least, each cell has these pictures, each cell has at least 500 stars. Okay? Because now I have many more stars. I don't have 7 million. I think for the evermain sequence we had something like 260,000, and for the giants we have something like 12 million stars. Get pretty good coverage. And the giants, again, has a much smoother velocity field component. You can definitely see now much better this area of positive velocities. And interestingly, not exactly in the direction of the peak of these vertical velocities are not exactly in the anti-sun direction. And that's because the sun does not lie exactly on the line of nodes of the warp. If the sun was right on the line of nodes, we knew that was near the line of nodes, yeah? If it was exactly on the line of nodes, it would be the peak velocities that you would expect in the anti-sun direction. But probably the line of nodes is actually about somewhere between 10 and 20 degrees from the sun. Okay? So the peak is shifted toward these velocities here. And we also, now before, what we didn't see before is it looked like from the earlier data sets, I didn't show you those pictures, from the earlier data sets where we were constrained only to the stars with line of sight velocities, it looked like the giants and the upper sequence stars didn't look the same. Well, the problem is that we were really constrained to a much smaller area. But now there's more similarities. You can also see the signal from the warp in the young stars. But the signal is not the same. It's also interesting. It's definitely with the young stars, something going on vertically more complicated other than the warp. Whereas the signal in the giant stars is almost exactly what you would see from the warp, and I want to show you here at the moment. So this work was published last year. It was the culmination, if you will, one of the papers from Eloise's thesis, and she, to our surprise, she won the Lorenzoni Prize that was awarded to her at the site this year for that paper. But we're not stopping here. We want to go on. Now we want to actually model those, not just show in a picture these velocities, but understand what those velocities are telling us about the dynamics of the galaxy. So this is the model, our work model, which is described a very simple model, geometric model, symmetric. There's different propositions, different ideas about how to parameterize the growth of the amplitude. The h function there is just how the amplitude grows with radius. A sinusoidal variation with respect to galactic azimuth, and putting this into the Maxwell-Boltzmann equation, you can derive that the expected vertical velocity is this, and this term here is the precession of the warp. Okay, so if you hypothesize that the line of nodes is moving, okay, and not your warp geometry isn't static with time, but is precessing, okay, then this is the parameter which describes how fast that geometry is moving. So depending on the direction of the precession, you can make the velocities larger or smaller with respect to a warp that was static. Okay. So what we're going after here is this parameter. Okay. We're going to estimate this parameter based on the astrometry in Gaia. And we're going to do that. So this is just a minute. Okay, yeah. That's certainly the parameter I was just talking about. Let me just, to give you an idea of what the work model looks like. Let me go back. I need to be able to start this. No, I want to go out. It's a movie. It should be a movie. I may have to get out of the. Make it go. Here we go. It's okay. And now it just disappeared on me. Okay, how does that happen? It moved my presentation out. No. There it is. These virtual windows drive me crazy sometimes, I would say. Because now I have to look at my screen and see where my cursor is. Okay. Couldn't have this. I did regret that. See, it took me out of that. Okay, I'm just
He was
gonna
there.
I'm
Go
gonna
back.
like this.
He
I'm
was
gonna
working.
like this.
Just give it time.
Okay. So this is showing the galaxy rotating. It's not terribly obvious, but it's actually this here is warped. So here's a grid to help you see the warp of the galaxy. If you looked edge on, it would be much more obvious. The red line there is the line of nodes. Okay, and you see in this simulation of a galaxy, the line of nodes moving. In this case, the line of nodes was moving counter to rotation. Okay, let me go back into presentation mode here if I can. Get my cursor. There we go. Back into presentation mode. Okay, there's probably a trick to doing this. All right, so that was sort of a short movie to give you an idea what the model is trying to do. Try to go through this step by step. Okay, so what we want to do is to calculate the likelihood, the probability. Do I have a laser here? We don't have to have to it? Or just a stick. I can just point the terms here. There we go. We've got it. Perfect. Okay. So what I want to do is calculate the probability of my data set. Okay, which I'm using the parallaxes and the proper motions in galactic latitude, given the positions of the stars, the errors from the catalog, model of the galaxy, and this parameter here that I'm going after, which is the precession rate of the warp. So the idea here is given a precession rate, what's the likelihood, the total likelihood of my data set, probability of my data set, and what is the value of this that maximizes this likelihood, okay? And this is just found by the product of individual likelihoods, if you will, okay? The probability of observing that parallax and proper motion to the star, given its position in the sky. And given my hypothesized precession. So I can do this for different precession rates and find the value that maximizes this sort of likelihood. So these individual likelihood, which is just the probability of my data, given the model by presumed model, okay, and the errors, measurement errors, is just this integral over the true values of the true distance and the true proper motion. And this first term here, this first factor in the integral, was termed likelihood, so it's my error, or I like to call also my error model. Okay? So that's what I'm going after. This is my error model, the first term. Okay? That is the probability of my measurement given the errors and if the star was in a given position with a given true proper motion. And all of this here is essentially everything else. So everything else being my model of the galaxy, my model of the warp, my kinematic model, how the stars are moving. So we've included here asymmetric drift, the term that I showed before, the vertical motions, but also including a rotation curve. We have also included in here our selection function. So given our color selections, the probability of seeing a star at a given distance, given our selection criteria. Okay? And that's all. I'm not going to go into any of that detail because it would be a long talk. But I do want to say a few words about the error model. So the error model is this based on the covariance matrix. Okay, so taking into account also the correlations between the parallax and the proper motion. Okay, that's what these correlation terms here are. And here what I'm going to put in is I'm not going to put in the formal errors in the catalog because it's known that the formal errors are underestimated. So I've corrected for inflated. People have studied how much the errors, the true errors, and essentially this inflation takes into account small systematic errors that are on small angular scales. Remember, I'm looking over large all over the sky, but so small variations in systematic errors at small angular scales, it essentially practically inflates the errors with respect to the formal errors, right? So I do that, and what happens is my error distribution then is just a bivariate Gaussian, where the principal variables of my Gaussian are this quantity here, so the difference between the true and measured proper motion and galactic latitude, and the difference between the quote-unquote true parallax, 1 over r. Did I bump something? I bumped something. I probably accidentally pushed a button somewhere. Sorry. Actually, just the green. Just the green button. Okay. And then I also want to mention that we've included here also the 0-point error in the Gaia parallaxes. Okay, that's what the negative 0 here is, the small offset. And our result then, after going through that and looking at a series of different values for the precession rate, we find that we get a value for the most likely value given our data set for the precession of 10.5 kilometers per second per kiloparsec. We have a very small statistical error because we have, when we did this, remember, we were only adjusting one parameter, precession rate. And also because we have a very, very large data set of 12 million stars. We're doing this over. Okay. This systematic error, better, safer. So, systematic error is estimated based on varying slightly, say, the 0-point error or galactic rotation, and seeing how much our value of precession changes when we change those values. Redoing everything again, the whole procedure, using slightly different parameters in our galactic model. Okay. And so this value that we get, just to put it in context, at solar radius galactic rotation, we have a angular speed, if you want, of near 30 kilometers per second per kiloparsec. So this precession rate is about 1/3 the velocity of the sun around the galactic center, okay, and in the direction of galactic rotation. So precession is diminishing the velocities with respect to, say, a static warp. And you see that here. So what we can do is compare then for the value of the precession rate we find. We can calculate what first of all, we can see what the data looks like. Yeah? And this is for the value of the precession using a model, the value of the precession rate that we put in. Okay? And this, just as comparison, this is what a static warp model would do. You see the velocity would be much higher if the warp was not precessing. And here is what the proper motion, our data would look like. Okay? And here, when I say data, I've used the distances from the previous paper, where we had inferred distances from the parallaxes just to make these maps, and calculating for each cell what the velocity, with the median. Actually, this is not the velocity, but the median proper motion and latitude in each cell. Okay. So definitely, I think it's pretty clear that the precession, having a precession rate, gives a much better correspondence with the data than either a noble warp model or a static warp model. And now, okay, so that closes essentially the research that I and Lisa are doing. How am I doing on time? Another 10 minutes?
10 minutes.
Yeah, okay. let me also mention some other things. Just not to talk, Gaia has revealed also other things about the galaxy, about its kinematics and dynamics that we were more peripherally involved with, but I think are very interesting in the context of what Gaia is revealing about the galaxy, and also is related to these vertical motions. Because the big question, we've known for a long time that the Milky Way has a warp, but there's been no consensus as to what is the mechanism causing that warp. There's a lot of ideas, theories that have been proposed for what has caused the warp of the Milky Way. And already what we're trying to do with these simple kinematic models is already excluding some of those ideas of what could be causing the warp. The fact that I'm seeing the warp in both young stars and old stars is indicating that it's a gravitational effect. And the fact that the warp is precessing and not static. And so some of these are already informing us about and putting constraints of ideas of what could be causing these things. In addition, I want to now focus on what Gaia is showing us about the dynamics of the galaxy if we focus on just the stars near the sun. Okay. And I'm now going back to the set of stars that have also line-of-sight velocities, where we can calculate the full six-dimensional phase space position of each star. So looking in the solar neighborhood, which is just within a few hundred, 200, 300 parsecs from the sun, you can make a map like this. This is showing the velocity component toward and away from the galactic center, U, and V is the velocity component in the direction of galactic rotation. In here, this to the galactic center, that's a mistake. Just ignore that because that shouldn't be there at all. I'm not sure how that got in there. Anyway, so you see there's a lot of structure here. The old idea, before Hipparchus, the idea, we'll model the local velocity field as and look, the velocity looks like, right? Hipparchus already showed us maps similar to this, where it was clear that that simple sort of model of the velocity field, things are a bit more complicated. Yeah, we see a lot more structure here than in the simple Gaussian distribution. And unfortunately, I have to say that the detail, I can see much more detail on my screen than I can see on the projected image. But in any case, there's very clear a ridge here that is devoid of stars. And this is thought to be primarily a resonance feature caused by the bar of the galaxy. And one could also point out the position of different known moving groups on this plot. Okay, that tend to be in some of these clustered regions. So one is the Hyades and one is the Pleiades, and you can also play that game. But we can do this kind of Gaia because we were able to see, of course, sample much further than just a couple hundred parsecs from the sun. So we can do much better. This is sort of a picture similar to what Hipparchus gave us, more detailed, but similar. But now we can do the same game looking at volumes away from the galactic neighborhood. Okay? So moving in different directions in the galactic disk, look at the same slice of the velocity space, and see how things vary. You can see the positions again on my screen. It's much easier to see. But for instance, the position of that resonance feature changes as you go away from the galactic center. That 2GC is right. In this case, so this is the volume at the solar neighborhood, and this is the volume toward the galactic center and away from the galactic center and in the direction of galactic rotation in the other direction. So this resonance feature changes position depending on where you are with respect to the solar neighborhood. And that's a very useful and strong constraint on any sort of dynamical model that you put in to explain these features, right? We now not only have to explain what's going on near the sun, we have to explain what's going on also away from the sun. One of the big surprises that came out of looking at these velocities in the solar neighborhood, however, was also structures like this. Plotting. So what I'm doing, I'm slicing and dicing my six-dimensional phase space. So in this case, I'm looking at z position up and above the galactic plane, and the velocity with respect to the vertical velocity. You can see these strong correlations, a spiral feature, when you look at this phase space, this slice of phase space. And this was a big surprise. Now, no one expected to see something like this, especially because the stars were supposed to be on small scales. It's supposed to be dynamically relaxed. But in fact, what this is showing us is that not too long ago, maybe 500 million years or so ago, the disk was perturbed. And what we're seeing is people have shown then consequently after this was discovered that if you perturb the disk of the galaxy, it responds, wiggles, okay, and these sort of like having a bunch of pendulums, yeah, that are not, each pendulum, okay, is completely, I should say, not connected to the other pendulums. But if you push all the pendulums, even if they have, the pendulums each has their own different length, so they each have their own different period. But if you push all the pendulums to a little, in one direction and let them start going, you start seeing patterns just because of, with time, at first they look like they're almost in phase, but then they go out of phase, and they go back into phase, and you go out of phase, and back into phase. And you get, essentially, this spiral pattern is a result of that. As time goes on, it wraps up more and more and more until it disappears. Okay? So we're looking at we're seeing in the stars that the disk, the stars are showing us really this relaxation process. Okay? Right now, there's different ideas that have been proposed for what's causing this. The most, I think the most popular one, which I also agree with, the most, I say the prime suspect is the Sagittarius dwarf galaxy. Because we know that right now the Sagittarius dwarf galaxy, which we find on the other side of our galaxy, is moving upward, but it's already gone past perigalactic passage. So, more or less, 500 million years ago, it had already, so it's going through the disk plane twice because its orbit is inclined with respect to the disk of the galaxy. And this is probably the result of its first galactic plane passage. And I think I'm a few more minutes here. So these are also other structures in the disk. You can see it better on the screen. You can see it here. This is, you can see it better, these ridges. Okay. This again is not necessarily due to the perturbation I showed you before, but our thought also be due to spiral arms, and possibly the bar is causing some of these ridges. So now I'm looking at another slice in phase space. This is in galactic centric radius and velocity and direction of galactic rotation. And again, you see a lot of structure in phase space. Yeah, that is really telling us, giving us information about the dynamics of the galaxy. And the fact that the galaxy is not actually symmetric. It has spiral arms and bars and a bar and stuff like this is causing these structures. And it will help us to understand the dynamics of the galaxy. And this is again going back to the spiral. So the same game that we did with the velocity map, you can look and see how the spiral changes as you move away from this position to the solar neighborhood. And just to sort of convince you this idea of that the Sagittarius dwarf could have caused some of these perturbations. This is a simulation, and again, I'm going to make this simulation go. This is the question. It doesn't want to go.
It's going. It's going.
Is it going?
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, it is. I wonder if it was that easy the other time. I just had to click on it. So the red dot is the Sagittarius dwarf galaxy. So it goes through the first galactic plane passage. Another galactic plane passage, and the time, you can't really see it, is millions of years, actually billions of years there at the top. So this is more or less the position of the Sagittarius dwarf. And what's interesting is in the simulation starts with an axisymmetric disk. Now there's different simulations where the unknown here, the biggest unknown is how big the Sagittarius dwarf was, right? And so how much of this responds, but in this particular simulation, at the end of the simulation, you can see a bar, you can see spiral arms. And so I think the this idea that the Sagittarius dwarf could have caused such a disturbance in the galactic plane is also making us rethink a moment about the cause, why we might have a Warring-inspired arm. Maybe it's not responsible for the war in our galaxy, but maybe it is. So this is sort of a new idea. We have to really take more seriously this dwarf galaxy that's almost very hard to see. In fact, it was discovered with the radial velocity survey completely by accident. So, what equilibrium? The Milky Way disk looks like it's not in equilibrium. In fact, another thing you can see in here, if you look at the disk, is it's not so flat anymore. So maybe the Sagittarius dwarf is also probably responsible in part for the warp of the galaxy. These are the links to the paper, and this is my last slide, so I'll just end here. This is just a link to the papers that I was just talking about, aside from the latest results in the warp, which is a paper that's going to be submitted soon. And that's it.
C'è stata abbastanza discussione sulle paralassi, nel senso bisogna tenere conto di bias, eccetera. Voi avete usato qua, cioè
abbiamo usato un approccio bayesiano dove tu metti come un prior un modello abbastanza semplice per le distribuzioni delle stelle nel disco grafico. La cosa più importante è tenendo in conto della scale height, because except when you're right in the plane, in just about any other direction, if you start going a bit off the plane, the most important characteristic of the stellar distribution, which causes the density of stars to fall off as you go further and further away, is the scale height. So as you go off out of the galactic plane, the density of stars falls off. Okay. In the Bayesian approach, you can also take into account other properties of your measurement, right? So, for instance, you can take into account the fact, in a consistent way, the fact that you have a 0-point error. And in fact, you can even, you can even use it, say, just that parameter. Use it as in fact, that's the right thing to do. If you have enough stars, and depending on the sort of analysis you're doing, if the distance is an important parameters, you probably should be, for instance, if you're calibrating Cephids, for instance, you want to use Gaia parallaxes to do that, the 0-point error should be in a parameter that is adjusted in that kind of approach. I've not done it. We've not yet tried to adjust the 0-point error. What we've done is we've looked at the literature. There's several estimates for the 0-point error, and so we say, okay, we have giants in a certain magnitude range, and so looking at the literature, we've chosen a value which is consistent for the magnitudes of stars and color of stars that you have. Because it's almost, that 0-point error is almost certainly a function of magnitude and color. But it's not well known exactly what that function is.
Do you think you can do some kind of work like the one you show us, like kinematics, but in LMC and dynamical approach? I don't know if the intrinsic error and systematics can allow you to do something like that. Maybe there are bright stars.
Yeah, no, I think people have, in fact, one of the first results, even in the first data release from Gaia, was showing that if you bend the stars in the LMC in zones, so you could get enough stars, and average over the stars in each cell, you could definitely see in the proper motions, the rotation of the LMC. Yeah, and so I think my gut response is, yeah, why not? Why couldn't you? I hadn't thought about doing something like that. But
it would be interesting to see the difference between the satellite, the galaxy, and the our galaxy.
Certainly, I haven't talked. There's a lot of different Gaia results, not just taking a few papers out of hundreds of papers that have come out since last year. And one of the interesting whole family of results have been looking at dwarf galaxies and globular clusters, using the Gaia proper motions to derive the tangential velocities tangential to the line of sight, and having good distance estimates, not always from the parallax, but you have other ways of finding the distance to dwarf galaxies from variable stars, Cepheids, or Lyrae stars. So if you have a distance estimate, you can then turn those proper motions into velocities, and then you can do orbit calculations. And people, there's a whole lots and lots of papers that are actually working on deriving what the mass of the galaxy is, what the potential at large distances from the galactic center, so essentially the mass distribution in the halo, thanks to looking at many of these globular clusters and dwarf galaxies. Yeah, they're definitely interesting stuff, but you can't do everything. So. You have to sort of pick and choose what you want to work on. Yeah.
Just two questions related to Milky Way.
Yeah.
So you mark that the Gaia is serving at visible wavelengths.
Yeah.
So what kind of the first question is what kind of improvement could be obtained by fusion at infrared wavelengths, where the extinction is?
Yeah. It's definitely one. There's already an idea. There's papers, white papers, and stuff like this. In fact, I think right now, ESA is asking the broad community, also not just scientists, but asking the broad community, what do you want ESA to do in the next 20, 30 years from now? Yeah. And you have to really plan ahead. I mean, Gaia started working on it as soon as I came to, pretty much as soon as I came to Torino, which is in '96, I started working on Gaia. So it takes a long time to get a mission like this flying. But people are already starting to talk about, we want something after Gaia, another astrometry mission, and one of the popular mission profiles is to go to near infrared.
My second question was related to not astrometry of stellar objects, but classical way to trace the structure of the neural hydrogen line at radio wavelengths. So what would you expect from future large facilities like the SKA?
That I don't know. Now you're going into an area that I'm not familiar with at all. I think typical. The problem with the radio wavelength, you can get good velocity measurements, but the problem is knowing how far away the galaxy is, right? So you can see all the galaxies, but knowing where the mission is coming from has been difficult. In fact, there's these dynamical distances, but Gaia is now showing that those dynamical distances in our parts of the galaxy can be very long. So, and I think also Gaia is showing us deriving distances using a simple rotation curve isn't going to work when your galaxy is not axisymmetric. And Gaia is definitely showing us the velocity field in the plane of the galaxy at large scales, and kiloparsec scales, cannot be characterized as being axisymmetric. Yes. Definitely important systematic velocities. Again, there's no big surprise. They're on the order of 10, 20 kilometers per second, but it can make a big difference. That's all the interesting information is there.
Just to make sure that we understand that some issues are cleared up and some issues are actually getting even more complicated.
Yeah.
Because it is well known that to have a bar in the Milky Way is actually, you don't need much. So they naturally form a bar.
Yeah.
Okay, even in axisymmetric.
Yeah,
and so
there's been in fact there was a paper just came out this week that
the fact that there was
they were using Gaia data showing that there's definitely evidence that the bar is very old and formed.
Yeah, I mean, so this issue of is exactly the point you made. I mean, the non-axisymmetric part is now getting interesting because it implies we can see the interactions with the small things around the galaxy.
Yeah.
Okay. But saying that the Sagittarius is the cause for the bar in the galaxy, there's no way.
No, I don't believe that either. But I think it was good that, it's good that we just not rather than just carrying on with the old assumptions, or
Yeah.
or allowing the data to challenge us, to say, okay, well maybe it could have been different. And I think people have done that since. And as I was saying, the paper just came out last week, using Gaia data really convincingly shows that the bar formed a long time ago. And that's again no surprise from in-body simulations. The bar instability is a very natural instability.
There is a big black hole right in the middle of the galaxy.
Right.
So it's really interesting. And but my question to you, because I haven't looking at those nice plots, like fans and all sorts of things. How much of those will stay as we get the calibrations on the way?
No, they'll stay. They're definitely real. Definitely real.
Okay. To that level of detail?
Yeah, to that level of detail.
They look really like might be some kind,
people have said
of systematics.
People have said over and over again, not only people in Gaia, but also people who aren't in Gaia but started working with the data as soon as it came out. No one is used. The Gaia has really impressed the community, not only because of the volume of data, but because of the quality of the data. It looks like simulations. People say, "Oh, man, it looks like simulations." People ask all the time, "Is that data or is that simulations?" I mean, the first time we're sort of in this ambiguity zone. Am I looking at simulations or data?
But that is because the number of particles.
But also the precision, because you see these sharp features in the data, and it's really impressive. It's extremely impressive.
Sì, allora ringraziamo